So every now and then a part catches my eye and I just want to try out a workflow for modeling it just to see if it's actually achievable. And so I'm just going to spread out my view and split this window in order to turn this into a UV image editor. And we can bring in a picture of this little air compressor that I've been obsessed with. And they say it's the smallest pressure washer. But yeah, I've just been looking at pressure washers on Google, and this one had a really interesting shape that I think would be fun to actually take on. So, not aiming to be entirely accurate, but I went for a workflow where basically I inserted a cylinder, RX90, and let's look at it from the front. I'm going to grab this 4 wide, or actually 4 wide starting from the center, but really 5 edges. And we're just going to extrude this up, SZ, maybe not too big. From here we could just go back into edit mode, select everything, scale it out a little bit, maybe sharpen it. And before we actually jump to the phase of cutting it, we want to deal with the bevel. So instead of selecting everything and dissolving it, forgot about my keystrokes. So instead of selecting everything and dissolving it, we're just going to press Q and go under operations and choose clean mesh, which will just clean the mesh for us. And so from here, if we bevel, we are basically limited by the edge that's on the surface. So if anything is the point of all these discussions this month is that, hard decisions have to be made. So I'm going to press Control X and dissolve that edge, which basically allows us to bevel just a little bit further. And so now I'm just beveling it, rolling the wheel, and we'll just dissolve that edge, and that'll be a smooth enough transition. Mesh Machine's getting its proper shine this month, so we'll just use a symmetry, and I'll just Control Shift click sharpen to just recalculate the sharpening. And really, let's get on to the fun part. The goal isn't to make the entire piece, but really just to talk about this troublesome area directly in the middle. I figured this would be actually the hardest thing to create. So we're just drawing a box, utilizing view. I toggled on align to view, and I'm just drawing a box. We'll press B and bevel, and I'm just going to roll it to about maybe 8 segments. I was looking at it thinking 9's not even enough for me today. And just really thinking about where I want this. Of course, I have to adjust the amount of depth and offset if I want to move this completely up and down with all the versatility I want. So maybe about there. Let's press B and ensure that it's completely round, and really just giving it a hard look. Normally I would apply it by now, but I just want to, Subdivision will have our back, and Bevel will have our back, or whatever we use, it'll have our back. So let's press X to turn it to a slice, and hold Shift whenever you apply it, so that way the cutter is still selected. So I'm just going to Shift D, duplicate, and go in edit mode, and we're just scaling it in on the Z and then scaling it on the Y. And right now this cutter does nothing, but if we select this and the cutter, we can set it up with difference. And so just looking at the hole in the middle and having flashbacks to previous times, we'll make the hole just a little bit bigger, so that way it'll just be a funner experience. Otherwise it'll be a shorter discussion. So now we've shift clicked auto smooth or shift click sharpen in order to fix the shading. And here's where the fun can begin. So if we press Alt V, we look at the wireframe, and Boolean results will give Boolean results. So let's just take this in local mode for a moment, and I'm going to go under my Q menu, and we will choose set origin and just play off of this dot and drag it to the right axis, which is this one. Let's try that again. We want to mirror this way, and basically now our X is this way. I'm just weird about my X axis. You don't have to be weird. You could work on the Y, but then I would find that weird. So, deep philosophical question. So the thing about this video was I was going to actually title it Coincidence, because first of all, we need to Control A visual geometry to match. We don't need booleans or live modifiers where we're going. The time for editing's over, especially when Sub D is talked about. You've passed over your Fifth Amendment rights for the right to modify your mesh. So that's a talk for another video, but I'm just going to try quarantining this area, and let's press Control T and then Alt J, and we see that we almost had a near coincidence is what I call it, where it almost worked out. Let's offset it by one edge, and then let's try it again. Control T, Alt J. Now we have two. Wonder where it's getting skewed at. We could just go in and actually start quadding it ourselves, and I guarantee you we'll run into an area of curiosity. So it looks like I don't get to name this video get to name this coincidence because I didn't get to run into the coincidence, but we did manage to create our loop. So that's our goal. Don't know why Alt J wanted to be that way, but that is life. If we turn off the mirror for a moment, we see that this is what we have. And because we basically forced our flow to now be correct, which in a way is a coincidence because we're only 6 minutes into this video really, we can basically recalculate our sharpening, which will get rid of the blue lines, trade them for these red lines, and we could just unmark to get rid of that. I'm really just staring at this corner. This corner looks like it's like sticking out so far, but maybe I'm hallucinating on surfaces. I've really been looking at a lot of surfaces. While I've been doing a lot of videos, I've actually been doing way more models. So let's just take this edge and press Control B, and we'll roll the wheel because we have a normal bevel right now, right? So we're just going to set one edge, but we need to press P and set our profile to 1 because when we're dealing with subdivision, we're not messing around. And so we have our edges being protected by this boundary, and we could do the same thing with this, except we make it a lot more narrow. And so at this point, if we transition over to subdivision, disable auto smooth, really just let our solution take the wheel, we have a very nice looking mesh result, and it really didn't take us very long. I mean, we could finish this whole thing in under 10 minutes. So if I was really trying to speed run this, we would go in, Control A, apply. And today's a good day to talk about Inset. So I'm going to just select all of this with L because in Control tilde we have apply seam selected for whenever we choose sharpen, which is basically a super marker. So with this selected, we're just going to press I to inset, and inset will offset our problem just a little bit, and then we can solve just one loop away and it'll be a lot simpler. So because of the simplicity of this mesh, we could just Alt X. Notice how when I Alt X, this mesh isn't actually congruent. It's congruent that way, but it's not congruent that way. So let's say we wanted to center the mesh based off of this particular edge. Well, really, if you have snapping pies, you could just have origin to selection. It's a done deal. I mean, now it'll mirror. But let's be complicated. We could press Q, go under Mesh Tool, set origin, click and drag our line. We've now created our x-axis. You know, like I said, I'm a weirdo. I always like to have my x-axis first. And let's also mirror this to the other side using bisect. And because we've quarantined the edge as well, let's bevel it to have one more edge, and let's bring it in. And having this much protection for this edge means that we could really get in and party. I'm going to Alt W to open Boxcutter, and we're just going to drag out a box, press Control X to draw out a knife box and get something like that. And really now we can get this party started. So we got Verdi Mergy. Verdi Mergy always has to come to the party, especially when you're partying with Blender. But like I said, we could have this solved as far as subdivision goes in under 10 minutes. Really just ending this if we wanted to, but you know, we want to spend more time together, don't we? I'm hoping. So that is pretty much done. That's that. However, we could solve some of these areas just a little bit better. For example, adding a quad there will allow us to at least be a redirect. We could add a loop and just not be so lazy. However, I could tell you in advance that I have tried this solution over and over like an idiot, and it never works because of the geometric density and the fact that we've added to the profile of the cylinder, like silly people forgetting previous lessons. You know what? I'm wasting time. We're almost to the 10-minute marker. let's unmark everything and just jump this up to subdivision, and we see that we're done. However, the Ngon at the front did not survive. So people are always asking why I added triangulate onto the mesh. It's precisely because Ngons just don't survive subdivision. But if you triangulate Ngons, which is all that triangulate will do if you add it, it will basically make it survive the subdivision conversion process. So there's really not a whole lot more to it than that. It's just like a weird observation that I'm a big fan of. So such a inquisition I receive on that. We never want to look at subdivision in edit mode. I don't know how many times I have to say that. Let's press I and then press B in order to offset this, and we're just going to let this all converge here in a terrible way, and we're just going to merge all of this geo, hoping that we're not grabbing something on the other side, and that will at least solve that a little bit better, protecting the perimeter. I mean, when it comes to subdivision, you protect your perimeter however you want to. There's a variety of disciplines when it comes to perimeter protection. So here I'm adding an edge loop. Someone previously mentioned to me in the comments of another video that you can add an edge loop. And if you look at the top, there's options for basically pressing E, which will make it even. And you can press F, which will flip which edge loop it's actually being oriented to. So this one is being oriented to this edge over here. But if I move it this way, we see that it gets really conformal. But if I press F, it's now actually conforming to this edge loop perfectly. So I no longer have to move edge loops all the way in and all the way out. It's just I don't know. I've been playing a lot with it. It's crazy. Sorry I didn't notice that sooner. You know, Blender shit. You call it shit too. You know, Blender shit at the top of the screen is just so hard to see. You know, just I love it, but it is just so hard to see. You know, like you press knife, and all the tooltips are down here at the bottom of the screen, and you know, you think that's great and all, but I press Z to cut through, and man, I wish knife would be a little bit more visual on the cut through. Like, I'm being dramatic when I say I want it to do more, because I'm thinking in my head like pulsing or something, which is silly, but it's just hard to read that text. I mean, I probably need glasses, but I tell my girlfriend I'll look like a loser and I'll get wedgies. You know, the moment I get glasses, I'll go outside and someone will just wedgie me in the air and throw me up over my roof. But I'm just being dramatic here. You know, wedgie crew, stay away from me. So simplifying that isn't the best idea, but I know every time that the pinching that happens here is just visually unacceptable. It like affects me. I don't know. So I just know that a little bit of consolidation to get it out of there will just save me a headache. But anyways, this shape has now been converted into a subdivision shape. I mean, if you really want to be nitpicky, you could say, hey man, what about this area? And I'd be like, well, what about it? Fine, I'll show you a technique I use. Actually, I can't. You know, say sometimes I will select a surface like this that's like not circular, and I will just block it off and then use grid fill on it, and then I'll select the rest of it, grid fill on that, and then relax it. And I'm like, wow, Blender, you party. You know how to party. I mean, as long as you just don't crash, especially on such basic workflows. That's the most important thing about these lessons that I'm trying to teach. Like, I'm trying to lay down some fundamentals as like a fallback, you know. In the event you can't do something, like, you know, hit it with some traditional thinking, because in the end, you know, the task has to be done. I tend to always fall back to the fundamentals because they're just so classic. Also, did I fundamentally protect this loop? Yes, I did. Just making sure. And we can move this one over. We can move this one over. And not the biggest fan of what I see going on here. I mean, we could solve it again, but then we're going to be talking about some geometric skews, like maybe something like that. I just don't know. Really questionable. It's kind of a big quad on a high curvature area, so it's always a deep ponder. Like, I don't know. Probably the reduction of this loop could help, just kind of re-edging it along, but then I'm over obsessing. So the goal is to do this in a timely fashion. So here we're looking at a shape that is basically the subdivision result. So alternative to this is like the HardOps result, where basically instead of having subdivision, we take the mesh and we add a bevel on it, and then we just basically set its profile to 0.5. And we can do the same thing with this as well. Just remove the subdivision and add a bevel, set it to 0.5. And it's a little bit more faceted, I could tell already. And then here we're looking at the subdivision result. So, it's a philosophical question for you as a modeler as far as which one do you actually need at the end of the day. I mean, if I wanted to be some sort of lunatic, I could get into car paint. We talk about car paint all the time and highlight all of my failures. However, at the end of the day, I'm just looking at this as a mesh. In fact, I see this area kind of looking a little questionable. I still ponder what the better solution could be. I might come back with a redux. I just don't know. Probably the answer would have been up-resing this, which would have been adding one additional layer of subdivision to it in order to hold the form better, but which would have mitigated this to be an even smaller area, thus making it work. But here we have a bevel result, and here we have a subdivision result. Let's go ahead and add our text object for setting up our presentation for this. We'll add text, F9, set it to view, go to our text, and we're not doing too bad on time. I might be able to wrap this up under 20 minutes, which, I do value your time. Especially if you're tuning into these daily lectures. This one will be bevel. And let's press Q and adjust spacing. If there's one Q menu that's important to text for me, it's the spacing. And we'll call this one subdog. Subdizzle. And then we got our bdizzy over here. And let's grab this and move it over. And talk about sub-D, because with sub-D, this is what our wireframe looks like, pretty beautiful. I mean, this one also looks good because we gave it a very nice sacrifice. I mean, if we were really doing this for booleans, we could just get in here and clean the mesh, and this would not really that's being dramatic. But once we hit it with, that's being so dramatic, there's no way that, oh, I gotta undo that. I would never do that to my mesh. Alright. Going back over to subdivision. So right now we have this loop that kind of looks like this, which is relatively simple. We could always go into this mesh in edit mode and grab this loop and slide it around in order to create something a little bit more interesting. However, this is something that isn't afforded to you with the bevel. I mean, with a lot of versatility out of the box. So, whenever I was working on this shape, I was having some fun with just kind of playing with different widths on it by sliding the shape. Also, never display your subdivision edit mode. It just lies to you. So let's take this loop and slide it back. We can press E in order to align it to this one. I mean, we actually need to zoom out to see this. We can press E, F in order to flip which one we're aligned to. So maybe something like that, which means that we can select this loop, control grab all the way to there, bring this in, really relax it, and something like that. To really relax it, but we still have it going tight as we go along the top, so we're not really compromising everything that we've created. We're just going for like a variable bevel that transitions finally around a particular curvature. So this is some of that classic stuff that sub-D is good at. Like we'll add a loop in this area, and we got about 30 seconds left on this. I mean, unless I want to just go on and on. And really, let's think about what we have here. I'm going to create a double loop here so we can really think about what we have. Let's slide this in. We could also slide this one back in just to get something a lot tighter. If we turn it off, it's kind of hard to see. but it's definitely a variable bevel kind of result that we're getting with Subdivision. Just really being random here, playing with different edge loops because we have such a perfect flow. So sometimes having a nice flow can play to your benefit. So I mean, I've never promoted having a bad flow around curvature junction areas of great importance. All right, so I hope I'm not being misquoted on that out there in the wild or something, but you know, whenever you're dealing with an area that transitions, you gotta get that flow together with your geometry. Otherwise, it's gonna just be tore up from the floor up. Like, you know, you could hack your way into making it work, of course, but my goal is definitely to get that surface right. You know, I don't want people writing me back about my surfaces being like, hey man, you having a bad day there topologically? Like, no. I mean, if they are, they better show me some N-gon. So here I'm just getting real random with it. But we could do the same thing with this as well. All I did was slide it in, just kind of slide it out just to really flatten it out. So, you know, just getting in here with Subdivision, we were able to create a really interesting kind of transition. I mean, really deviating from the concept art, of course, but we could bring this back. And, you know, the man to do it is Mesh Machine. So if we press Y, we can go in here and choose Unfuse. Wait, I pressed the wrong one. Press Y, we want to choose Unfuse. And then we press Y again, and we press Unbevel. Maybe it was not Unbevel. Maybe it was actually Unchamfer. So now we're actually back where we started. So, you know, we made a mistake getting all experimental with what we were doing. Let's get rid of this loop as well. And let's say we want to actually bring it back to reality. So we want to unmark this chart by basically marking it, unmarking it. And we could just press Control B, roll the wheel, because we still have this profile bevel because we solid our bevel. And from here, this is our result. So just like that, we're able to just go back and forth, but just wanted to have a little bit of fun with the Subdivision and also talk about the workflow I used in getting this particular result.